Hello, friends, and welcome to Ask Zach. Today, we are going to sit down with the great session and touring guitarist, Jeff King. I hope you enjoy it. I need to thank the sponsor of today's episode, and happy to be partnering with True Tone on this special episode. So thanks to True Tone. Hello, friends, and welcome to the True Tone Lounge. Today's guest is Jeff King.
Hello, Zach.
Hello.
Thanks for having me.
Jeff has had an amazing career, starting with moving to town in the 1980s and working with Patty Loveless, who, of course, was a kind of back to basics artist that had spent a lot of time on television. So you got to be on things like Austin City Limits and a lot of television.
Oh, yeah.
Then transitioned into studio work and worked with everyone from Faith Hill to Luke Bryan, and continued to do studio work, and also has been able to kind of juggle doing live work with both Brooks and Dunn and Reba in the last couple of years. So we're going to get Jeff to tell us how he moved to town, how he got into session work, and how he's able to, juggle playing with two major acts at the same time. So thanks for coming on, Jeff.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So you were born and raised in the Smoky Mountains of East Tennessee.
Yeah, I was actually born in Arlington, Virginia.
Okay.
My folks worked for the government in D.C., and we lived there for a year. My dad, being from East Tennessee, Townsend, which is in the Smokies, we moved back and grew up there until I went away to college. So then I went to East Tennessee State University, got a degree in graphics and design engineering, which very mathematical. I like math.
Yeah. So how'd you pick up the guitar?
Well, that's a fun story. We used to go visit my grandmother for 2 weeks in the summer in West Virginia, in the hollers up there. And my Uncle Kenneth, as a kid, when you show up at your grandmother's, you're 8 or 9, 10, I was 10, you're snooping around in the basement, which is scary because it's up there in West Virginia, and at the time they had a coal furnace, so it was the grates and the thing behind,
Yeah.
and the closets, looking around. I was like, oh, what's this? Pulled out a guitar. So I loved music, and I was like, well, this is interesting. So who knows the tuning, but I just remember playing a string going, oh, that sounds cool. And playing, somehow I may have gotten it into some tuning. I don't know what, but my folks said, well, all right, let's get some guitar lessons. So in Townsend, there wasn't a music store, of course, but there was my family friends, the Sullivans, and they had a band, and they were all fine musicians. They played different places around the area, so the singer of the band, or there might have been more, but Ronnie Sullivan was kind enough to come out and show me the few chords that I learned first, in Wildwood Flower. Learned to play Wildwood Flower. And then I went to school, and we had show and tell in the 4th grade, and I told about the 4 major chords, G, C, D, and it might have been E, and the teacher was just, but anyway, so then I move on, and really sparked an interest in me, and started listening to records and learning what made me feel something, like what made me feel emotion, or what made me excited, or how we sat down and we try to learn from records. And now it's so much easier with Amazing Slow Downer and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But back then, you just keep doing it until you get close. And I think with my ear, that's what I did. I got close, and I was like, okay. And then I kind of moved out from there. So,
what was sparking your interest the most?
The years are fuzzy to me about exactly who was when, but I loved the Atlanta rhythm section. I loved kind of Southern music, of course, I loved Leonard Skinner, but Marshall Tucker was a favorite of mine because Toy Caldwell I thought was so, just had such an emotional thing when he played. And I'm not sure when Mark Knopfler came on the scene, but that just was like, wow, this is the coolest thing I've ever heard. And of course, the Eagles, one of the ones that I can remember that drew me in was I Can't Tell You Why. And the guitar stuff on that was just, it was like, wow, this is super cool. I met with Don Felder, introduced by a friend. We had lunch together, and I asked about 30 questions. He was telling us all about Hotel California and how that came to be. And then we ventured off into some other Eagles stuff, and I've seen the documentary, so I didn't want to get in anything hazy, you know.
Right.
So I remember asking him about, so I Can't Tell You Why. What's there to know about that? That's one of my favorite solos, hoping that he played it, but I didn't know. So he said, well, it's funny. He said, we all took a crack at solos on things, and whoever kind of made the best fit, that's who did the solo. And he was like, that wasn't me. And I was like, he said, but Joe Walsh did one. And he said, and it was late at night, and there was a lot going on, and that's not Joe's. So, but anyway, I think, I'm not sure who played that one.
It was Glenn Frey.
Glenn Frey, right.
Yeah.
So beautiful, you know. The note choice, so beautiful. But
Perfect.
anyway, you know, I kind of went down that road and, you know, like I said, dropped the needle back and forth until you finally get something, and then trying to learn, just like we all do, basic guitar stuff. And
When did you start playing gigs?
well, so I was in and out of guitar through high school, football, baseball, basketball. And then I went to college, and some guys on my floor played guitar. So we started playing together, and I was really terrible. And we were probably, they were really good to my memory. And so we started, met a guy, I worked part-time at a printing place there, and one of the guys there was a bass player and a singer, and got to know him, and he said, well, let's put a band together and start playing some VFWs and Elks Lodges and stuff. Mm-hmm. So my first gig, my first paying gig, was in Elizabethton, Tennessee at the Elks Lodge. And we made $30 that night, 2 nights, $60 a weekend. It's like, wow, this is pretty cool.
Yeah.
You know? So, and then we just did that for the rest of my college days, and it was really fun, you know.
So was there any temptation to get it in, like while you were in college, to switch majors or anything? I mean, when did you actually go out and do graphic design or work for a printer? When did you all of a sudden you decide, I've got to play music and I've got to move to Nashville?
I think that's was for me, that was just sort of in me. Was like, my plan was to get my degree and move to Nashville and get a job in my field, or, you know, sometimes no plan is the plan, you know.
Yeah.
And, you know, fast forward to moving here. When I moved here, some friends I met said, hey, you should go to this club. There's a really good band there. So I was like, okay. And in East Tennessee, no disrespect to anybody, but at that time, a really good band was a different thing than a really good band down here. Mm-hmm. And because up there, that probably wasn't what they did for a living. Down here, probably was. So I went to this club called the Stagecoach down on Murfreesboro Road, you know. And I walked in and I went, I don't know what to say. I thought I was a decent guitar player at that point. And that just, it was like the universe laughed at me and went, let's see what happens. And so I met Brent Mason that night, and we've been friends for, I've been here 40 years now. And so we've been friends 40 years, and I just can't say enough about what that did. First, it smacked me down really hard, and I was like, there's no way, you know. If everybody in town is like this, I must well find another thought, but
Well, you were lucky in that not everyone was that. But
Right,
yeah, there are a
right.
lot of great players, though.
But, then I started going, okay, like you do when you analyze things, I have a sort of an analytical view of that stuff. And I went, all right, I'm going to go back. I'm going to start using this as an education and figuring out, I don't want to play like Brent. I want to figure out what he's doing. And so I can use that, and that'll open up the world a little bit for me for playing. And so I went back, maybe 3 nights a week, and I'd sit there, and all of a sudden we started coming in with these little micro cassette recorders, and I felt a little weird about it, but I wasn't trying to do anything other than learn.
Yeah.
And when that stuff is happening, like, I'm sure your people know Brent, but when that's happening, it's happening fast.
Yeah.
And it's like you can't just go, I'm going to remember that lick, because it's the beginning of something that goes on, and there, it's phrasing.
Yeah, and there's no iPhones. You're not able to video stuff, and so the most you can do is that. And so it's just funny in that there are a lot of stories about guys going down to see the Don Kelly Band and seeing Brent Mason. And Jimmy Olander told me that he would hand the cassette player to Brent, and Brent didn't mind. He would put it up near his amp.
Yeah. It's amazing. I mean, I felt a little weird about it, a little self-conscious, and then we just finally we were just like, just 4 or 5 of them on the table, because all the guitar players would sit at this little round table over by Brent's, amps. And, that's just the beginning of learning and trying to figure that stuff out. And so I met 4 or 5 guys there, and we all became friends, and, we'd meet down there, and we'd go out to the Waffle House or whatever. And I remember one night, one of the guys said, okay, let's talk about what we're going to do here. Let's talk about everybody's plans. I want to hear. And he said, I plan to give myself 5 years, and if I'm not touring or doing sessions or whatever, I'm probably going to go back to Virginia. And my dad's got a real estate operation that's doing great. And the next guy's like, I'm going to give myself 2 years. And when it got to me, I was like, I'm not sure I'm smart enough to do this. All I see is going forward. I don't know how to get there, and I don't know exactly where I'm going forward to, but I need to follow this.
Yeah.
And, sometimes being unaware is blissful and beautiful.
Well, and sometimes the no backup plan has a benefit. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you definitely got to put it all in, or fail, and then figure it out. But anyway, yeah. And then
Go ahead.
Well, then Patty Loveless came along.
How did that come about? Who contacted you?
Every gig I have has an interesting story.
Yeah.
So in East Tennessee, my friend Jeff Coppage lived beside me, or I can't remember. I don't think we were ever roommates, but he was the other guitar player in the first band that we had up there at the Elks Lodge. And then he went off to do other things. And so he left ETSU and moved down and started going to MTSU because he wanted to be a recording engineer. So he got into their program back in like 80, 81 maybe, something like that. And then he called me and he's like, hey, come down one weekend. I get this many hours. We start at 9 p.m. and we have to be done by 9 a.m. And we're so excited, but don't really have any plan on what you're going to play. So it's like get a band together and we just kind of jam over some chords, play blues, and he works on the snare for 2 hours and works.
Right.
I learned some stuff back then by being there with him. It was a place called, I think it was called the Haynes House. It was an old house, and it had a 2-inch machine and big console, and I don't remember what kind of console, but anyway, we stayed friends the whole time. And when I moved here, we hang out together, and he started working for Jimmy Bowen as, sometimes the names get fuzzy to me, but Steve was one of Jimmy's engineers. I can't remember Steve's name right now, but Jeff was his assistant. So Jeff just finished the Patty Loveless record. Patty just finished her record with Bowen.
Right.
And Patty's manager was her brother, Roger Ramey, and Jeff said, hey, Patty's going to put together a band, and there might be an opening. Do you want me to pass your name on? So he did, and Roger, we were all green at the time. I mean, Patty had been playing a bunch of clubs and doing great stuff, but it was her first record deal, and I'd been doing clubs all over the U.S. and Canada, and wanted something a little cooler, you know, than playing Holiday Inns, which is nothing wrong with that because I learned a ton of guitar at those places. But all of a sudden I get a phone call and, hey, we're going to get together over here. You want to come and play? I'm like, sure. So we got together at Acuff Rose, which was on 8th at the time. Do you remember that? Across from what Sonic is now, right?
Yeah.
And in the attic, upstairs. It was kind of hot. But Emery Gordy was there because he was playing bass on those records, and he was kind of helping Patty put the band together. And so I show up, and there's 4 other guys, a bass player, drummer, steel player, an acoustic player, and me. And I think we got the music early and tried to dig in and learn some of the stuff. So we went through a few songs, and then she said, well, okay, well, I guess we need to come back. Can we do like these next 4 days? And we leave, and everybody leaves, and we're going, well, do we get the job? What are we doing, you know?
Yeah.
So we come back, got the job, I guess, because nobody said anything different. And Emery's there, and he's helping us. Okay, this part might be a little different, and, you know, since it's just you guys and there aren't 3 guitar players, you're going to need to do this and this. And he was so helpful and generous and, you know, kind. And Patty was so awesome. And the music, you know, spoke for itself because, you know, mountain music, sad mountain music, and just cool kind of the country version of what bluegrass might be, I would say, you know, just hearing her voice, you know. So I was there for 6 years.
Yeah. And, you know, Emery, for those that don't know, you know, Emery Gordy Jr., you know, played bass with Elvis and Emmylou Harris and the Hot Band, and of course ended up marrying Patty later and producing, you know, many of her records, and then of course played bass on all sorts of things from Burning Love with Elvis on and on and on, and, you know, just that's a high level player that y'all had in there.
What a resource.
Kind of guiding you through these things.
And then late nights on the bus, we got the stories.
Oh, so he was on the bus with you?
Occasionally he would come out on the road, and and there was some funny stuff. There would be the stories, but later on, after they were together, you know, we had 2 buses. We had a band bus and Patty's bus, and sometimes Emery would come over and hang out with us until 2 or 3 in the morning. And I remember one night we stopped at a truck stop, and Emery said, I'm going to go back to my bus. So he goes over, he knocks on the door, it's locked, and because they didn't have the keypads then.
Yeah.
Patty comes to the door, and she just looks at him and says, no. And she turned around and walked off, and Emery had to come back.
He had to find a bunk on the band bus.
Well, you know, being on the road.
Yeah. So, you know, those albums, you know, of course you have some of the stuff that like Ray Flacke played on, but then you start getting the stuff that Albert Lee played on. You have Timber, I'm Falling in Love. I mean, those are some tough, you know, there's some interesting rolling and B-bender guitar stuff, and you were playing guitar with a G-bender on it.
Right.
Yeah. And so you were having to learn all that. Were you given, like, of course now they'd call it stems, but were you given like any of like isolated guitar parts, or were you just hearing the tracks and learning what Ray or Albert or Richard Bennett or any of these guys did?
Or Steve Gibson.
Or Steve Gibson, yeah.
Reggie. No, we were just given the record. And I don't remember getting any stems for that stuff. And trying to adapt the G to the B-bender stuff, it was interesting. But I always learned stuff.
Yeah.
And I always felt overwhelmed while I was doing it. But every one of those guys played just beautiful stuff. You know, Albert, in his stream of consciousness stuff would just be insanely awesome. And some of the phrasing was unique, and it would lead you into the 4E, what you would think would be thing, but I don't know, somehow it just exposed a lot of stuff for me. It was like, here's a whole new world that you hadn't seen before.
And so you've been playing clubs and such, and all of a sudden you're playing with a signed artist. What kind of gear did you have when you started playing with Patty? Did you go into debt buying gear, or did you have anything decent?
You know what? I think I had, at the beginning, an Ibanez UE 405. Remember those?
Yeah.
And
it was a little multi-effects little thing.
Had a delay, had a compressor, a chorus, an EQ, and a delay, I think. And you could change the order. And it had a loop where you could put a volume pedal.
Yep.
So I think I had a Pro Reverb, which I still have, that my folks bought me as my second amp. I think in '71 they bought me a Vibro Champ as my first one, which was, you get down and you hear that speaker and you go, wow, this is so. And then, to be honest, I can't remember.
Yeah.
I started with that, and at some point I ended up with a rack and 2 Pacific cabinets. And, some stuff started to get a little more like when Richard Bennett came in, like That Kind of Girl and stuff. It seemed like I was taking the sounds that I heard on the record. Like if the guitar had delay on it from the studio or reverb, whatever, then that's what I felt like I needed to have whatever's coming out of the speakers.
Yeah.
So, it got a little more complicated, but, not that much. So.
Yeah, it seemed like you would mainly be reproducing like cleanish sounds until some of the Richard Bennett stuff, like That Kind of Girl, that got a little bit more, gainier than some of the other stuff. And then I guess later on, some of the Steve Gibson stuff, like Hurt Me Bad in a Real Good Way.
Yeah.
That was a little more chorused, clean, and stratty and such.
Yeah, and then Jorgensen, I can't remember if Jorgensen, we did a bunch of stuff with Patty and the Desert Rose Band. So somehow, I know he did one of her videos, and I can't remember if he ever played. For some reason, we were just all together a lot back then. But, jumping off of that, I was introduced to AC30s and that sound, which, interestingly, Mark Sampson was John's tech, and I would see Mark laying in the back of the stage. Jorgensen would have 2 AC30s, and he would have a cloth in one hand holding up tubes, until he could get them to stay. And I'm thinking right back there sometime was born Matchless.
Yeah.
So.
Yes. It was, again, from a conversation with John, it was the fact that they were having a hard time keeping those amps going. That is the whole reason that the Matchless amps came about. Yeah. So and that John is the guy that got Mark Sampson out of the middle of nowhere.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
John and I were doing a session one day, and I had my Matchless in there, and he came into the room and he said, "Hey, can I offer something for you?" And I said, "Yeah, what's that?" He said, "Try this setting." And he went, I was like, wow, okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Just how you hear things, and they're pretty simple with five-way switch and a few knobs, but anyway, that was a fun moment. But
so a lot of those, a lot of tones during that era were direct, and is that one? I guess that kind of goes with the rack setup and the Pacific cabinets and using the EVs and things like that. That was kind of reproducing the direct chorused kind of sounds that you heard a lot. Did you have it seemed like I remember seeing like a boogie head that you had on one of your rigs.
Well, so I was thinking about moving to LA at one point. So I went out there with a friend for a while, and somewhere my friend Jeff Coppage moved there, and I can't remember if it was before he came to Nashville, or I think it was before. He spent a year or so, 6 months or something out there, and got in and worked for some guys, and said, "Come out and check it out." So we went to Bob Bradshaw's place over there, And I had done a gig with Patty out there, and I think at the Greek Theater or something, and I had just stayed for a few weeks. So I had my guitar with me that had the bender on it, and we were going over to Bob's, and I just grabbed my guitar to take with me. So, you know, that was huge for me because Lukather, I mean, all the guys had those giant rigs, and they sounded so great. And I remember walking, we went to Bob's and knocked on the door, and nobody was there yet. So there was a Waffle House across the street, or some kind of diner like that. And my friend Dean Hall and I went in there, and we were sitting there eating breakfast, waiting, because I think, you know, they probably opened around 11 or noon out there or something, Bob's place. And Bob came in and ate breakfast. And we didn't want to say anything because we were just as enamored by him as, you know. And so he goes across, and we followed him over and said, hey, you know we don't have an appointment, but we're from Nashville, and just, this is all we see, and this is what we love, and can we see some stuff? And we spent some time with us. He said, sure. And he said, started showing us rigs that he was working on at the time, and he had a boogie head with no tubes. And he said, just pull the tubes out. And I'm like, it baffled me, so, you know. And then he had all the load resistors, and he taught us in about the 30-minute span how to use load resistors and go into these boxes and have level controls and, you know, all the stuff that I did there for a while. And so I had my guitar, and I was playing some stuff and using the bender, and Bob was like, what's going on here? I've never seen anything like this. And I'm like, you work with the greatest guitar players in the world. Check this out, you know? And he was like, that's amazing. And he's, you know, when you first try one, it's not easy, but you get it pretty quick. But that was just a great time. And then I decided later on, I was like, I just don't think this is for me out here. So I moved back, or didn't move back. I just didn't move. So
yeah. So you were using basically amps and this Ibanez multi-effect thing, and then you went to a rack setup with the speaker cabinets and everything.
Yeah, with the power amp, and then, you know, you have your head with the pull tubes, and I don't think I had a load resistor because I didn't need one, but you know, at some point we all had those little gold things, the big round things, and but you know, went through some effects and just tried to get a cleaner, better sound of what I was hearing on records with a little bit of chorus, some of that delay stuff, and the nice verbs. So then along came the studio preamp, the Boogie Studio preamp, and from there, my rigs just went crazy because I started getting into more studio work and hearing more sounds, and I felt like I needed more options. You know, it's always a fear to show up and not be able to get a whatever sound.
Right. The producer's going to ask you for a sound that you can't produce.
Yeah. So I ended up probably with my biggest rack rig. I had the Soldano X88 and the Boogie preamp in there, and the ability to plug a head in and use it as with a load and use that. And had the VHT Chrome 2150 power amp that I think Dan had one as well. And you know, it just, you know, things get out of hand.
Yeah. So how did the transition? Give us the transition from Patty Loveless to playing in the studio. You know, so I'm guessing you were. I mean, because you go from being a little bit green, you know, playing with Patty, and then of course then you play with her for 6 years, and you get a lot of experience playing on television, playing bigger and bigger shows.
And a lot of time to practice, and a lot of time to listen to those records and figure out tones and parts and try to figure out why, which is an interesting thing, you know. Plus, when she would do records, I would go, you know, she said, you come to the record, you know. And I'd go meet Reggie and Steve and Larry London and Mac McIntire and John Jarvis and Paul Franklin and, you know, all the guys that were my idols then, because just a quick backstory, when I moved here in 1983, still vinyl. Every record I had, I knew every player and what they sounded like and what they had played on. And I called a lot of guys when I got here, and I called Brent Rowe and said, Brent, how do you get these sounds? Well, he would call me back and spend an hour. It's like, okay, on that record, I did this and this and this. But anyway, going forward, that's how I learned how you think about these kind of things. So
that's amazing, because guests in the studio are not really the norm. A lot of people don't like, because there's always label people and management and all that other kind of stuff, and usually they don't like guests. So the fact that Patty included you and let you watch these things go down and let you learn from that was
it was cool. And Albert, didn't want to leave Albert. He was there a lot. And she was cutting at that time over at Soundstage, when it was a room with no walls. So they had big monitors up, and then when they would cut, everybody was on headphones. So you could take your headphones off and hear Larry London over there. But whoever was playing guitar was probably direct. I remember Reggie going direct, and Leland Sklar was there some, and Glenn Worf, and so anyway, I learned kind of a little bit about the studio scene there, enough to be really confused about it. So as the Patty gig went on, towards the last 2 or 3 years of it, I met a bunch of publishing guys that were doing lots of demos, because it was a crazy world in Nashville back then.
Yes.
Every day, every studio was going all day, and some of these guys I made friends with, they were like, hey, why don't you come over and play on a session? And my first session that I remember, I showed up, and it was Glenn Worf and Steve Nathan and can't think of the drummer right now, but tiny little studio about the size of this room. And by that point I had a rack and stuff, and luckily the engineer was my friend Jeff Coppage. So we cut the 4 or 5 songs, whatever, and I stayed and fixed everything I did wrong, because I was completely freaked out. Milton Sledge was the drummer. Okay. So all these guys, I knew their name and knew all the records they were on. And I was just freaking out. So I'd dial in these songs to get them closer to what I thought they should be. And I got better and faster, and I got a few more sessions, and I got better and faster. And then I met band guys, started seeing some of the same guys, and from there it just sort of blossomed into more stuff. And then I left. I was like, I don't think I can be out here. I think I want to go do this for a while, because we were starting to get some of the same tours again, being at the same venues again. And I loved Patty for the gift she had given me of letting me learn while I was there. And it was hard to leave, but I remember the exact moment hanging up the phone with her, and she was like, however I can help you, you just, it's been awesome and all this, and, really emotional for me. And I hung up the phone from a really good paycheck to click zero right then. So I started playing clubs around town, doing writers' nights, and I could already read charts, but do these writers' nights on Monday nights out at the Holiday Inn Bradley Parkway. You'd show up, and a writer would walk on stage and hand you a chart and go, ding, 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 here's kind of how it goes.
Yeah.
3, 4, and I started coming up. I was like, okay, well, the song needs a lick at the top.
Yeah.
So I started coming up with licks, started learning how to play solos like that off the cuff and fills, and before long I could read charts like crazy, thanks to my friend Chaz Williams. I don't know if you know Chaz. He ended up writing a book on chart, Nashville number system. But so that all kind of snowballed into more sessions and more stuff like that. And before long, I wasn't able to keep up doing those kind of playing things, just because sessions got crazy for me. And But it was a crazy time, and everybody was crazy. So we were all doing 3 or 4 sessions a day. You know, we'd start at 10 in the morning, get home at midnight, and not every day, but you know, a lot.
So you're getting to do these gigs where you're having to read charts, you're having to come up with hooks, you're doing these things, you're playing on demo sessions, you're going to school.
Big time going to school. Yeah.
And so also you're entering this world. It was the perfect timing because there's all this work. You're getting to do all this, you know, lower level studio work, because you know you're going to be competing with all these guys that are, you know, your heroes, and that you've been kind of emulating what they did, you know, whether it was on the road or even.
Oh yeah. Well, like we're saying, Albert, you know, you learn that stuff, and with the bender, and you know, Steve Gibson had benders as well, right?
Yeah.
And Brent Rowan.
Yeah.
And Brent Mason. And there were so many guys then that were big influences on me. Those guys, all of them, Chris Lusinger, you know, man, it's just so many ways to skin a cat, you know.
Yeah.
So I learned how to do that, and then I think one of my first record dates, there were 2, and I can't remember which came first, but they were both overdubs, and one was on a Pam Tillis thing that had a bender thing on the demo that my buddy Walt Aldridge had played from Muscle Shoals, and so I went in and played the bender parts on this song, and I can't remember the name of it, but it was with Pam, and Pam wasn't there. It was just me and her engineer and maybe the producer, but that was interestingly fun and nerve-wracking. And then in the 90s, as I started doing more sessions, I got a call from Walt, and I started going down to Muscle Shoals and doing a lot of stuff at Fame. And then I kind of started, you know, on some of those sessions, David Hood would be playing bass and Roger Hawkins would be playing drums, and, you know, Spooner or whoever would be, you know, I'd kind of thrown in with some of those guys down there. And boy, here's another huge lesson of philosophical music, you know, on where the beat is and just how to do things. And, so I don't know where I was going with that, but I used to go down there, and so Rick Hall asked me he said, we were in Studio B one day cutting demos with Walt, and he said, I can't remember if this was pre-planned or he came in that morning and said, son, can you move over to A and do a song with me? I need to do a Marie Osmond song. And I was like, oh, that's cool. And so I went over and spent, you know, however many hours with Rick, and I was like, wow, this is starting to be fun, you know. I mean, it already was fun because I'm just playing guitar for a living and thinking up stuff, you know. And then from there, people would hear demos, and you get called, and you just start going to play on more records, and you know, just living the dream.
There were also a number of, you know, there was, you know, the Nashville Network and CMT, and there were a lot of like country music shows and country music, you know, all these television shows, and sometimes they had staff or house bands and stuff. I remember seeing you a number of times on like, you know, there was a Ricky Skaggs thing that he did like Monday night at the Ryman and such, and I remember them having like, every week there was a different guy. It'd be, you know, Brent Mason, Brent Rowan, you, and all sorts of other cats, and start getting in the also kind of house bands on TV shows also.
Yeah, those were some fun weeks. Those were done usually in a week, a season a week, or maybe 2 weeks. But I would do a handful of them, and Brent Rowan would do some, and like you said, Brent Mason, and I'm not sure whoever. But those were long days.
Yeah.
I think I remember getting there around 8 or 9 in the morning, getting home at around 10 at night. But then I had my book and a CD of what we were going to do the next day. So I would spend a couple hours going over this stuff,
Yeah.
show up in the morning, and then we would kind of do our thing for the morning and do rehearsals and rehearse these songs. And then we would come in and do rehearsals with the artists and everything. TV stuff is not how you see it on TV, as you know. You show up, and I remember one day, we did 2 shows every day. One day we had Don Gibson on and some more country things like that. The following show that night was Michael W. Smith. And it's like, whew, changing worlds. But at that point I had my big rack stuff because that's what was going on. And fortunately, when Michael W. Smith had a song called My Place in This World, do you remember that?
Yeah.
Which a great song. And
Big crossover. Yeah.
Big crossover. Dan Huff played this amazingly blazing, brilliant solo. And I remember when that came out and I heard it for the first time, I went home and went, I'm going to learn this solo because this is cool. So when it came time to play that song, I was like, whew. I'm so glad I learned this.
You did your homework without knowing it.
Yeah, but then I had to dig in a little harder. But, extreme days like that. And we had, sometimes I forget there's been so much stuff, but piano player with a big white beard.
Leon Russell?
Leon Russell was on.
Yeah.
I've never heard a piano so loud ever in my life. And you open up his piano, it's like under the hood stuff. Huge monitors everywhere. But Leon was so awesome. And ended up talking with him. Sometimes you don't get a chance to speak with people, but I was just standing there and he just started talking to me and he said, hey, I like that Bender stuff you're doing. And I was like, I didn't even know that he thought I existed.
Right.
Because I'm in another part of the stage, and I was like, wow, that's cool. We talked for a bit, and there was Ray Price and his piano player Blondie,
yes,
who could magically transform, a basic sounding country chart into something that had chords like this. Mm-hmm. And it's just amazing stuff. David Hungate, Paul Lime, Harry Stinson, Aubrey Haney. I think Paul Franklin was there. And I'm sure there are other guys. Gary Bud Smith, who, unfortunately is gone. But yeah, those were some great days. But that was a lot of work.
Yeah. You don't think about the fact that it's like you're rehearsing and filming, and then you're getting ready, and then you're having to learn the tunes for the next day. Because every day was like, every episode had like 3 or 4 artists on there, and there was always diversity. It wasn't like you just had like, and you had an older act and usually up and coming guy and someone that was established. So
yeah, those were great times because they were so diverse, and we rehearsed. And then we would flip around backwards, and they would do, we would have to get dressed, like dress rehearsals, so they could film from off stage, or they would film on stage, up, close-ups and stuff if you're playing a solo, which sometimes got complicated. If you were doing a song that had that type of solo where you started off, you just didn't have time to learn it note for note, but you started off and you tried to end like it, but in the middle you kind of became your own thing. So when they're up close, you're trying to not let them be right here, because that night you might be playing something different, And,
right.
So I would always go to the guy, Tom, I would go to Tom and say, use that close up for that, because I didn't play it the same. You know,
Yeah.
oh, that's fine. You know, he'd
Yeah.
laugh. But then they'd write it down, and
Yeah.
sometimes they would do that, and sometimes we'd have to fix stuff.
Because I was at a number of those tapings, because they would just invite Belmont students out there, and because they wanted to have a full audience for those tapings, and so I went to a bunch of them, and so I never saw cameras on stage really,
Right,
and so
yeah.
I didn't think about the fact that y'all did another run through where they were just doing close-ups of, because that makes total sense, because there's no cameraman on stage yet.
Right.
All of a sudden, when you watched the show, there were some close-ups of the guitars and such. Yeah.
Yeah, there was so much funny stuff. Or for me, it was funny because I'd never been in that type of situation, but there were wardrobe girls, first time we'd had wardrobe to pick out stuff, and they would come up after those run-throughs, and they'd say, okay, this is this show, stand right there, and they would take a picture of you, every one of us, so, one at a time. Then we would go eat dinner, and we'd come back, and we'd do the last show first, and then they would come around with their Polaroids, and they would go, you got a different shirt on. It's like you got to go back and change shirts,
Put the shirt back on that you had. Oh no, I got spaghetti on it.
That's right.
Oh, how much? Because obviously Ricky's multi-instrumentalist, producer, and such. How much was he calling shots versus who was kind of acting as the MD on that?
Harry Stinson, I think, but it was sort of a joint thing. Ricky sometimes would come to me and say, it was never on when the guests, because Ricky'd always do a couple songs. And
Right.
I think I missed Highway 40 Blues, all those blistering fast things, which was totally cool with me because, I was a nervous wreck anyway. But a couple times Ricky would come over on his songs and say, hey, this is the way we did this in studio, would you mind? I'm like, sure. Oh, wow, that's great to know that.
Yeah.
Okay, I would have never thought of that. But Ricky was awesome, We've been friends since then, so, or probably before then, because we did a lot of stuff with Patty, with Ricky Skaggs, and it was fun being on there with him. He's talent, nothing to say. But
What do you
just,
say?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you continue to do session work. You're doing stuff for Reba and Faith Hill. You're working with Dan Huff and other producers, and then probably in the mid 2000s you start going out on the road again, and this time it's with Reba.
Well, yes. My wife Tammy Rogers she's a fiddle player and
the Steel Drivers.
In the Steel Drivers now. Yeah. She was actually playing with Reba at that point, and I had done a couple Reba records. Jerry McPherson and I were the two guitar players, electric players on those, the ones that we did together. And then I get a call from Reba's manager, Narvel, and he says, hey, Jerry has been playing with us, but he's going to go do some Faith Hill stuff, and would you like to come out and play guitar on some gigs? I'm like, It's interesting because until then I hadn't given any thought to going back out on the road because I was, dug into my studio work. And so I thought about it and I'm like, well, my wife's out here, this could be fun. And we were doing like 25 dates a year, so nothing was going to get in the way of other stuff, I hoped. So I said yes, and fortunately I didn't have to, do any auditions or any of that stuff. And kind of like the Patty thing, it's like, am I doing? Are we?
Yeah.
So I showed up at
You're
rehearsals,
the guy.
and
You're the guy.
And I got the tapes from the band leader and learned what Jerry was doing, and I cross-referenced everything with the records, and it was the first gig that I had done that was that big time, meaning that we rehearsed a lot before we did anything. It seems like, if my memory's correct, we did like 2 weeks over at, sound check and getting all the songs together, because I think John Jarvis started the same time I did. So John and I were in that first band, and well, not the first band, but
Right.
my first incarnation of that band. So we did 2 weeks, and then we went over to what's now Bridgestone in the back, and they have a huge big place.
Yes.
So they set up all the production stuff, and I'd never seen that. So I walk in and go, wow, this is the biggest thing I've ever done, And so then we rehearsed for a week, and then we learned okay, you're going to play a solo, we're going to put an X here to be here every day. On that solo, you go to that spot, and she'll do whatever she does, and no dancing or any of that stuff. Just.
I think that's one of the things that people don't understand about the shows, like Reba or like, it's like the guitar players don't just like move to some random spot during the guitar solo. It's like they've got, so lighting and video and everything, because all those things are such important elements to that level of show. It's like, you're going to hit this spot. And everything has to be rehearsed out. One, the music has to be rehearsed to where it's backwards and forwards and you can play it in your sleep. And then you've got to know where I have to be. It's like camera blocking. And it's like all of a sudden, these are your spots to be during this song. And you're going to, do this at that point.
Yeah, and that was important. And that was the first time I'd ever been on a gig that I knew exactly what I was going to play every night. And to some people that might be boring, but to me it was like, okay, I know what I'm going to play. Now my challenge is to play it, to see if I can get through one night without making a little, or whatever. You're distracted by something or whatever. But we did it enough to where we just knew your hands knew where to go, what to do, so. And at some point, your body knew where to go, what to do. And then there would be little variations of things that would work themselves out. Meeting with the other guitar player for a part or fiddle player or whatever. But a lot of that was pretty staged. And you're right, the lighting guys had to know where you're going to be because they're calling, here's the guitar player spot. If you're not there and you're over there, two things, this is weird, and you're over there in the dark. So.
No one's going to see you.
No one's going to see you.
What were some of the, because Reba has had such a long career. Mm-hmm. I mean, because she was having hits back in the 70s. And then, and so you think about the material that you're covering, the different eras of players, and also the variety of tones that you're going to have to cover. And then some of the like really interesting stuff, like some of the wah-wah stuff that's like on, is that on
radio?
Fancy or which of the some of the stuff that has like the some interesting wah-wah parts,
The Fancy has some stuff, but it's lap steel.
That's the night the lights went out in Georgia? Is that the one with the wah-wah stuff on it?
That's one of them, and that's a slide part or.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And then there's the radio song, which is that was the Jim Kimball, the other guitar player. So there's a lot of diversity out there, and gear-wise, I started with amps, 2 heads and 2 cabinets, and that show moves so fast, you can't. As I said, it was the biggest show I'd ever done, so I had a guy talking in my ear telling me the next song as the one's fading out. And at that point, there's a guy handing you a guitar, and there's a patch change, and you're starting it. Dang. So I adopted to go with another set of gear. And the front of house guys were like, sometimes the mic falls. Can you, any chance we can do direct? I'm like, whoa, So I found a fractal rig, and I set that up, and I'm still not finished editing for those songs. It's just ongoing hours and hours until wow, could use one more delay because we're tweakers.
Yeah.
With all of us guitar players. But anyway, I got it enough to what the best I could, and now it's just hit a button, and it changes amps, changes settings, changes BPM times, all that stuff, and I have a wah or I don't have a wah or I have a tremolo, so it just was fast. So
That's one of those kind of necessary sacrifices you have to make for the show, because it just doesn't make, because you're trying to cover all these different guitarist parts, and sometimes arrangements are different live too, and you might do a medley or who knows what. So
yeah, and we're playing arenas, so there's a lot of going on, and we did the best. So.
Then of course, Reba and Brooks and Dunn have done shows together and stuff. How did the Brooks and Dunn connection? How did you start playing with them?
I had known Ronnie and Kix from in town. I'd played on some stuff with them, and we started in 2015. Reba said, we're going to do a residency in Vegas. And the session players in the band were like, what does this mean?
Yeah.
Oh, all it means is we're going to go out there 3 or 4 times a year for like 10 days, 12 days and do some shows. Oh, okay. So it's going to be with Brooks and Dunn. So they kind of combined bands. We had all of the Reba band, and then we brought in, they brought in, Ronnie and Kix wanted a couple of their guys. So that makes sense. They wanted to be comfortable. So they brought in a guitar player and their drummer at the time. So maybe their fiddle player. So we did those gigs we're supposed to do 7 years, but we did 6 because of the COVID thing. Mm-hmm. But I don't think that they had been doing very many gigs, because maybe they stopped in 2010. And I mean, I could be wrong about that, but I'm not sure
they retired kind of,
Yeah, so in 2015, they were like, hey, we want to go do 2 dates at this Chicago festival. We want to get some of our old band back together. We want a couple of you guys to come with us. And they asked me to go, and I was like, great. So entirely different gig, gear-wise entirely different. Just to use whatever amp I had. Like at some point it was an AC30, now it's a deluxe, and a pedal board, and still moves fast, but it's a different kind of music too. So they did maybe 2 gigs the first year, and the next year maybe 5, and then it kind of developed into, hey, we want to go do a fall tour. And fortunately, they had the same management, and I was able to do both, because it wasn't just me. It was 4 of the guys from the band and a few guys from the crew, and so they were scheduling the stuff so we could do everything. I'm sure it wasn't for us, but it worked out that way. So and that's just what we did this year. Reba had an early year this year, and we did maybe 20-something dates, and then we just finished Brooks and Dunn a couple weeks ago, 25 dates, and basically have the summer off with the exception of a few one-offs. So it's a whole different thing. It's a different level of, it's different music, just different everything.
Yeah. Also, I guess with Brooks and Dunn, a lot of it, of course, was Brent Mason.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And
Kenny Greenberg was in some of that stuff,
Yeah.
and Kenny's always awesome. Love playing with Kenny, and he always comes up with great stuff. And we're 2 guitar players in that band, so we're loud, and we weren't really loud, but we looked loud.
So I think I saw one of your videos where you had your deluxe reverb amplifier in a road case.
Yeah, well, then it got to that. Yeah.
So did you get the vocalists in the band, aka the big names? Did they come down on you, or
No, we kind of came down on ourselves, because we were only adding to the chaos up there, and there's side fills on this gig.
Ooh,
and they are incredibly loud.
Yeah.
Which makes for a great sounding stage. And at one point I had a brown basement head into a 212 Marshall cabinet, or it might have been its own cabinet, but if I turned around, it was like, whoop! And so I had to be careful. And then if I walked over to the speakers over there, you had to. So I thought, this is insane. And we're all going deaf. We're all getting older. We're all,
Yeah.
So Lou and I, and and Charlie, all of us. Charlie Crow was the guy I played with first there, and we were like, let's just do this. And I can't remember if there was a hint.
Yeah.
But I was concerned because the fiddle player stood behind me on a little riser, and if I'm that loud, and then some of it's going back, just causing chaos. So we decided to go inside a road case, and they just push it back there somewhere, and we're done.
Because you're in ears.
Yeah, you were in ears.
So are people? So are Kix or Ronnie? Are they pulling like an ear out? I mean, why do they have the side fills that are so loud? I mean, I guess I guess it's just the feel of it. I mean,
the feel of it, and I think they both occasionally pull an ear out, and it doesn't matter how much you have everything the same on stage. Every venue is just going to bring something. Who knows? But it's just the way it is. So.
But that's one of the things that's interesting because, when people started using in-ear monitors, it was just that whole thing where, front of house controlled, and in the monitor world, they controlled everything.
Yeah.
And so then it's been interesting in that, kind of amps kind of made their comeback, and now sometimes they're live, sometimes they're in a case, and then sometimes you're running into artists that have big side fills.
Oh, yeah. With Reba, there are no amps on stage. The only thing live are drums.
Yeah.
And, with Brooks Dunn, we all have amps, the guitar players and the steel player, and the bass player has an amp up there. And, it's a different kind of stage. It's just, but it's a different kind of music. So it's a little more honky-tonk and ruckus kind of, so it's all fun.
Yeah. Favorite solo to play with Reba and favorite solo to play with Brooks and Dunn?
Boy, I think Reba would probably be Radio.
Yeah.
It's pretty fun, kind of bluesy, kind of quirky at the end a little bit, and Lou does a lot of the solos on Brooks and Dunn because when we were doing Vegas, I didn't want to start doing, we needed to keep things separate. So I do a few things with Brooks and Dunn. We do on Hard Working Man, it's really fun. It's a total blowout of guitars. So there's, we have a lot of solos, and at the end there's just this massive chaos thing going on where we're playing back and forth, and Ronnie's somebody's elbowing you, and Kix is running into you trying to, it's just, and then we go into a little harmony part. So that's a lot of fun at the end. So.
All right, Jeff, we're going to talk gear. And I'm going to start off with, this has kind of been your companion for a long time. This is a rare Joe Glazer built Telecaster with a G bender on it. So tell us how this came about, why you ordered it. Tell us the whole story on it.
Well, 1985. So before that, I had a Tele, 70 something or other, nothing. And I had palm pedals on it. Do you remember the big palm pedals? One would come out and they had little, they would bend up, out of the way, and then they would bend down, and one kind of came up and went this way, and one went out and went that way.
Yes.
So when I moved to town, I knew of one guy. I didn't know anybody. I knew of one guy from my area back in East Tennessee, Steve Embry. And he was very kind to me when I was here, spent a lot of time with him and talked about stuff, and he, taught me some stuff. And he had a bender on there. I kept thinking, that is the smoothest, coolest thing I've ever heard. He had a B on here, and he was a great singer, and I used to go hear him play and sing as well. So I had both palm pedals, and I found out the G was always in my way, so that's the one I used the most. And occasionally I'd use the B, but I learned more about the G. So when I went to Joe, everybody at that point, everybody had Glaser benders, and he was doing all that stuff out in his little shop in Leaper's Fork. So I went out there with my friend Dean Hall, and I said, I want to order a guitar, Joe. And Joe we've been friends for 40 years, or 37 or whatever, and Joe.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit of always kind of this going on.
Oh, yes.
Like, I don't think you really don't want one of these. But I do want one, Joe.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, let's talk about it. Okay, I want this and this, and, can you make it blue? Sure, okay. And I want a bender. Okay, I want a bender on the G string. Okay, so I think it was around the time I had started with Patty too, so I was real excited about getting this guitar, months and months, of work on it. And we'd go out there and check it out, and okay, here's your body. I just spray painted it. It's like, wow, beautiful. And it wasn't this color, it was different, but
it was brighter.
It was brighter
and lighter,
and yeah, less dinged. But then and here we're working on your neck, and there's a story I'll tell you.
Yes, that's the second neck.
Yeah. Second neck.
Yeah.
And so anyway, I was so excited, and Joe says finally, hey, I think your guitar will be playable next week. You want to stop by and let's tweak it a little bit? I said, okay. So I showed up, and I was so excited to get down, and I'm playing, and all of a sudden I go, Joe. And he said, what's wrong? And I said, this is a B bender. I don't want a B bender. I don't know how to do that. I want a G bender. And he went, oh, okay. And I was getting ready to go. I was so excited. I took it with me to get on the bus to go do some dates with Patty that weekend. I got back, took it right back out there, and he said, yeah, we'll make it a G.
Yeah.
So, this was still got all the stuff for the B, but all the holes and everything, but he made it a G, and I don't know, it just fit me, and it just, so, you can. Some of the steel things.
It sounds more guitaristic in a way, because it's on a fatter string, and I think so many people are tempted to go into like the Clarence White and Albert Lee licks that I think, I always thought the G bender by itself had a little bit more of an individualistic, kind of sound.
I think sometimes it has I don't know what's happening here sound.
Yeah.
There were some guys, and I say this with respect to them, when we're out on the road, they would come up after the show and go, man, you got strong hands. I'm like, what do you mean? It's like, some of those bends that you do, I can't do those. Like I had this thing for a while where I was go from a C to, as I'm bringing. He's like, I can't reach back behind the nut and do it. And I'm like, well, sometimes things are not as they seem,
So tell me, when you ordered this, because a lot of the guitars, this is the only one I've seen that didn't have a pick guard on it, or at least it was less common. I guess I have seen one or two others that didn't have a pick guard, but was that your idea or Joe's?
Neither one of us really, because Steve Warner had this set up, right? Early on.
The three pickup thing.
Yeah. So I wanted that, and so I snatched it pretty quick, and I took it back and finally had the bender fixed, snatched it again pretty quick, and I went back, the following week or whatever after, and I said, hey, we didn't put a pick guard on this. And Joe said, well, we didn't, did we? And so we laid it up on there, and he went, so we got about 10 pick guards, different colors, and put it on. It's like a white one, Nah, a black one. Nah, a
tortoiseshell.
Tortoiseshell.
Yeah.
And it's like, nah, and we both just kind of went, let's just leave it. Which, then this happened over the years. And,
Yes.
But it's just the way it came to be. Everything about this has made me so happy.
Yeah. And did you tell him like neck shape or anything like that? I mean, what did you just tell him you wanted a 3 pickup telly with a G bender, or?
Yeah, but there's a neck shape, and we went through a few things, and as again with Joe, it's like, no.
he knows better than you do.
He does,
he does. It's not it's not a show. It's for real. Yeah,
he's genius, and so it got this neck, and it's funny. I ordered a Strat, just straight up Strat, no bender, and had a Wilkinson bar on it, and I said, I want this neck though. I got to have I love this neck. And he said, okay. So we measured the neck, with his thing that he has. And whenever I went back to pick up the Strat, I was like, the neck's different. He went, no, it's the same neck. And I'm like, the neck's different, Joe. And he's like, well, all right, let's measure them. Bring it, and it was similar, if not really close. I think the way you hold just everything about the Strat is a different feel. So
yeah.
For me, maybe it was my angle of playing on the Strat became confusing to me, but that was always an argument, and then it became a fun argument, so.
Yeah.
But Joe has been my go-to guy since '85. There are other guys that are great in Nashville, but Joe is there have been times when I've been on a session at 10 a.m. and I'm going to do a 2 o'clock in Berry Hill, and all of a sudden there's a problem, like something buzzing. And I'll call over there and go, Joe, listen, I got a problem. Can you bring it by tomorrow? And I said, well, I'm working all day tomorrow, but we finish here at 1 and I've got a 2 o'clock in Berry Hill. And he was like, well, okay, drop it off and go eat lunch and come back, and we'll have it done for you. I probably shouldn't say that because some things are months out for over there, but we've been, doing this a long time.
You're a long time customer. So, and I learned this from watching Marty Schwartz did a good job of kind of doing, a thing where he covered a lot of your guitars, and you told some stories about this, and I only know about this because of Marty's show, so I'm going to give him credit. This is the second neck on the guitar,
right.
And so what happened to the first one?
When I was with Patty, we were out with George Jones, and there was a drum riser, and it had 2 big black speakers on it, And one there had a little 2x4 in the front on the top one, and so it was leaning back just a tiny bit. And we had all our guitars lined up across the back, kind of behind our amps, standing up. And fortunately, Steve Henson was in the band, and he had his old 50, 60, whatever telly sitting beside mine. But so at some point during somebody's sound check, it wasn't ours, but because I was in catering when this happened, I think it was on George's sound check. That monitor was so loud it moved, and it went whop, and mine was sitting in a stand, and it landed on top of it, and we never found all the parts of the neck. It splintered the neck into tiny bitty pieces, and it broke this little piece, and I ended up using. There was no hope to use this at all because there was no neck. Gone.
Yeah.
So I used Steve Henson's telly the rest of that weekend, and I had a guitar, a gig bag, and I went into Joe. I had the body in it and maybe a couple pieces of the neck stuck in there, folded over, and I went in, I set it down on the counter, and I said, Joe? He went, this can't be good. So he opens it up and it's like, my gosh, what happened? And I said, well, the same thing, the monitor fell off and the thing. And he's like, oh my gosh. And so he said, you got something you can use for a while? And I'm like, yeah, I've got other stuff. But I'd like to get this back because it's my main telly, you know.
Yeah.
So he works on neck for a while, and I call him and say, how's it going? He goes, well, I'm waiting on some other parts. I said, you mean like tuners and stuff? And he goes, no. He said, it bent everything. He said, everything had to be. He said, it hit so hard that the pickups were no longer usable and everything.
Wow.
He said, so everything's gone, you know. And basically, we're just restocking the guitar with parts again. And I was like, okay. So, funny story, Don from the Stagecoach,
Don Kelly.
Don Kelly was kind of working out there because he loved guitars, and he was helping out Joe do some things. And so he sanded this neck down in the back. Well, I noticed after a while I'd be playing up here and the string would fall off. And I went in and just said, Joe, what's wrong with this? And the first thing Joe does is he sits down and he goes, bam, like that. And he went, I think maybe that fixed it.
Yeah.
I was like, you can do that? He's like, that's a stick of wood, you know?
That's right. He popped it back into the right spot on the neck. Yeah.
But it turns out
on the body.
that Don had accidentally sounded a little too much right there, and so Joe did his magic thing, and I went to pick it up, and I went, I don't even know where that spot was. He goes, yeah, exactly. You know, so so it was all back. But anyway, this is the second neck, and you know.
And then it looks like these tuners have been replaced. It looked like it had Kluson type tuners on there at some point. Were they black or?
No, the original ones were chrome, and I think they just kind of wore out at some point. And, and I don't know how I got these or where I got them, but
they're locking Spertzels.
Yeah, they're cool.
And originally it had EMGs on there. When did the so I guess those were pretty hip pickups, you know, all through the 80s and 90s, and so that was kind of like the thing to go with.
So the EMGs, I don't know how that happened. I got a call one day on my Codaphone back in the day from Corner Music and said, hey, Jeff King, you got a package here. I went, what? So I go over to Corner Music and I said, somebody said I had a package, and they said, here, it's to you, but it's, you know, to us. And I went, okay, thanks. I was like, what is this? And I go outside and open it up, and it's like 3 EMG pickups. And I'm like,
wow.
Somehow, I can't remember if I had talked with somebody, or I don't remember how this all transpired, but they were Tele, their first version of a Tele pickup. And I was like, wow, this is really cool. They're very clear and fat, but they don't sound like the Strat clean, you know. So I used those for a long time, and then I went to Joe one day. As I was doing more sessions, I was like, I'm tired of hearing this. These were awesome, you know, and they're on a lot of stuff that I did. And I said, I need something different to hear. And I said, what about this and this? And, you know, you come back tomorrow. And I'm like, oh, okay, whatever. And I think we went through several incarnations of stuff, but I think what these are DiMarzio vintage noiseless Tele. Yeah. And I'm really happy with them, and they've been in there for a bunch of years. So.
And then that middle one's a Duncan Hot Strat Stack.
The middle one is yes, and it's the blender knob.
Yeah. What does the switch do?
It makes it so you can. So I can use these two.
Right.
You know, it's like a Tele.
Yeah.
It's this.
Yeah.
You know, but. And with the blender, you can blend in just a tiny. But you know, I found myself not using that. So at one point when we were reconfiguring, I said, Joe, just take that middle one out. And he said, you know, Keith Urban's really big right now, and you know he's got that Tele with the one missing there, and I don't think you want to take that out. And I'm like, he goes, because it might look like. I'm like, just whatever, you know.
I love it.
You know what I you know, Joe.
The doctor told you what you needed to do, and you did it.
The same way JT Cornfloss used to look at me like, really?
Yeah, yeah. Well, cool. Well, let's. Have we learned everything about this guitar? I love the finish gone. You know, where you've played the finish off underneath the pickups, and I guess in between your hand resting there and your pick hitting it and different things.
I guess, yeah. You know, the whatever, but yeah, it's probably my favorite.
Yeah, very cool.
And I don't know if you can get
yes, we didn't talk about that. So these are all these signatures of living and past people. There's Reggie Young and Willie Weeks and golly,
Jimmy Capps and Porter Wagner and Loretta Lynn. And I'll tell you how this started. It didn't start with me at a session going, hey, sign my guitar.
Yeah.
This, we were doing all these TV shows, and I did some TV show, and Earl Scruggs was on it. So Earl Scruggs was out on this little runway they had. I think we were at the Wild Horse filming this thing, and he started to walk back and stopped and spoke to every band member, and he was talking to me, and I went, I've got to get, this is huge for me, because I loved him from a kid, and one of the TV people, I said, hey, you got a Sharpie? And they're like, yeah, here. And I went, Earl, would you sign my guitar up here on the horn so it won't go away? And he went, oh, sure, I'd love to do that. And so he did it. And then I just thought, I'm never going to sell this guitar.
Yeah.
This only going to mean something to me. So I started having my friends sign it, and, guys that I loved, like Reggie, and, some of them are starting to fade. At one point, Joe did a spray over on it, but it's time to do it again. But I got Charlie Parade like 2 weeks before he passed away. I was on a CMA show, and I was in the band and house band, and Kix and Ronnie, and just people I worked with. So
yeah.
But again, thinking I'm probably never going to sell this. It's only going to be worth something to me at some point. So
that's kind of like your kind of signature instrument that you're kind of.
It's, if I had to have one, I'd probably have this.
Yeah.
So.
All right. What else you got? Here we got your Gretsch. Tell us about this.
I think it's a duo jet.
Yeah.
It's cool. I had a moment with Gretsch where we were doing stuff together, and they were very kind to me. And so Reba had a song that had a Gretsch sounding guitar on it, and I wanted to replicate that live. So I went to Gretsch and said, do you have something I can use for a tour? And lots of times they'll say, sure, yeah. And then at the end of it, it's, dinged up and beat up. And they're like, sometimes they'll make you a really good deal on it. And sometimes it's just, well, you did a bunch of TV shows and just don't worry about it. So this was one of the don't worry about it. And it's become, I love this guitar a lot. It just has a cool sound. And, like I said, there were 7 snare drums that gave up their lives for this finish.
Yeah, the finish is amazing on
Yeah.
that. That's definitely a crowd pleasing guitar, because when the lights hit that,
yeah.
Yeah.
And I had Joe change the bridge back here to a little more roller bridge. And
Yeah.
But it's it's the typical.
It's the sound.
The sound of pop country, one of them.
Yes.
So, and I don't know what this switch does, but it darkens it, for. So.
Yeah, I don't know why Gretsch always had the most complex wiring. That it was just hard to understand.
Yeah.
That's and why do you need a switch that turns it off, that kills the sound? Yeah.
Yeah.
I always did a lot of odd things.
I've got a few other Gretches. I've got a mid-60s Tennessean that has some interesting switches on it, and I've got a '64 Chet Atkins Nashville, the orange one, with the painted on F holes.
Yeah.
And I think it's got the rubber mute that sticks up.
Yes.
Which is really fun. You know, it's a tuning nightmare, but it's cool for the one thing, you know.
Yeah, for when you want that muted sound. But yeah, that's the one thing people don't think about, the fact that when those mutes come up, it messes up the tuning.
Oh, yeah.
Now we got the Tom Anderson Strat here.
Yes, this is a wonderful Strat. I'm not sure when I got it. Probably around 2000. And I met Tom at an AM show, and Roy that worked for him. You know, there was just a great bunch out there in California. And I loved the color of this, and I wanted a Strat to take on the road, do other things with. I've got an old 64 that I use a lot, and just wanted a more modern version of that. So this became that. And then when I started doing the Reba stuff, this became my Reba touring guitar. So it stayed out on the road, and you know, not at sessions so much, but interesting. You know, there's all kinds of jokes out on the road. Okay, so our video director out there, I put his name here, and I tell the guy in front of me, hey, at some point I'm going to stand still and you zoom in on that. And you know, back in video world, they have, you know, however many cameras, and he's like, what? And he says, hello, Bischoff, you know, so. And then this is for my tech, so he can remember which way doesn't buzz. And I don't know what that does. And that one doesn't do that, but.
So does it have like a dummy coil, or how does it kill the hum?
They're just split.
Oh, okay. Okay, they're like stacked.
I think so. Yeah. And it did have a whammy bar on the George Strait tour. When we were Reba George Strait, we were doing In the Round in the middle, and my guitar tech at the time was keyboard tech as well, and Doug Sizemore, the keyboard player, and MD had this rig, and sometimes, I don't know if it was a power thing, it would just go, and one night we're playing at the end of a song, and and I see my tech run to shut it off, and the front of house guys are all pulling, you know, trying to figure out where it's coming from. And so the drum tech brings me the guitar for the next song, which is this, had the little whammy bar in it. And so my tech would come up, and since we're on the stage and they're on the floor, he would hand the guitar up like this. So the drum tech's like, you know, and the bar falls out somewhere along the trip from wherever it starts to by the time, and I looked at him and I said, where's the, you know, the crowd's going crazy. I said, where's the bar? And he went, what? I said, the bar, the guitar bar. He went, and he walks off, and I'm going, his name's Keith. I said, Keith, where? And he's like, yeah. And he gets back, later I found out, he gets back over to Kenny, my tech, and he says, Kenny says, what was he talking about? He goes, I don't know, he's looking for some bar that has guitars. He said, we ain't got time for that. Yeah. And he said, what? And he's thinking I'm talking about a bar. Let's go drinking at the guitar bar later. I'm like, no, I need the bar.
I need the bar.
And the bar was never found, so I just gave it up. I was just tightening it down a little bit and, you know, left it. But I use this on a lot of Reba shows, and now it's back into my session world because it's just such a great sounding, great feeling instrument.
You've got a hip shot detuner on there?
Well, that started as the the Reba Little Rock. Yeah. Until she said, I think we want to change the key on that. It's like, she said, I want to go down to C. I want to go down lower. Yeah. And they worked it out, you know, and Doug came to me and said, we're going to drop that Little Rock down to C. And I went,
oh, golly.
Okay, so my first thing was I was like that. we can't do that's not right. So now I have a way of doing it digitally, and it's, you know, it's interesting.
So you pitch.
I drop this, and then because I'm in a different part of the stage, my tech hits a button and it goes to
Right.
the program, and it drops it a whole step, and we're in C. And then by the time I get back over here, at that point I'm playing D, which is C.
Yeah.
But by the time I get back, I'm playing C, which is real C.
Yeah.
So, and then I control it from that point on because I'm back over. But there have been a few times when he he forgot.
And all of a sudden,
I'm just going, oh, I'm going to get you.
what's worse than playing the big lick and being in the wrong
And
key?
in the wrong key, and nothing you can do about it. But hey, it's part of the joy of the road, you know.
Yes. So tell us about this pedal board. Is this your around town? What is the normal usage of this?
It's kind of, you know, back in the cartage, whenever cartage was crazy days, you know, I had a pedal board I would keep in cartage and one I would run and gun kind of a thing. But now I just have the one. I mean, I have other pedal boards, but smaller ones and things I do. But this is kind of my session board, basically.
Yeah.
You know the guys at XTS?
Yes.
Barry and
Yeah.
Greg? And yeah, I took a bunch of pedals to them in a bag and said, you know, I'm sick of doing this. You know, it's been fun for a lot of years to do it myself, but it needed some other under the hood parts, and they just put it all together for me. And is it Justin Butler that does I can't remember the name of his company that does
It's Through Tone.
Through Tone, okay.
Yes.
Sexy volume pedal with a different chord.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've got, you know, this switcher here, so I don't have to reach up here and do that.
Right.
So I can turn on, you know. Just whatever. And it's basically most of the stuff that I use on sessions. And I have a little thing over here I can connect another little board if I want, or other stuff. I can put it in line in here. But,
Yeah.
you know, use the Keeley compressor. And most of my stuff is, I just kind of keep it the level straight up and that off mostly, unless it's a solo that I need a little something for. And, you know, a few overdrive pedals and a couple delays. And
When did you make the shift away from the big rack thing?
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I can't remember.
Yeah.
It was a slow move, but because I had a head with the rack and I started
Right.
using that more, so.
Yeah. So you've got, you know, of course, the HX that can cover all sorts of bases. I'm assuming you're using this as an expression pedal. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then reverb and delays and more reverb.
Spring verb, yeah.
Pog, EQ pedal, dude, also. Yeah.
Just stuff, the light speed, you know, just things come and go
Yeah.
occasionally on here, so.
Yeah. Tell us about the amp that you got there.
Well, this old Harvard I bought from a friend of mine last year.
Yeah.
I mentioned this to you before, but I had I'd been looking for a mid-60s blackface deluxe, and I just looked around, and you know, sometimes when you start looking for stuff, all of a sudden it pops up somewhere.
Yeah.
And so I had randomly texted a friend of mine one day that lived in California, David Starr. He's got Starr Guitars out there. And I said, hey, David, if you see a deluxe come through your store, I'm looking for this. And I said, if you come, you know, happen to see one, whatever, let me know. And, you know, I'll put out some feelers, different people. He got right back to me and sent me a picture of a blackface deluxe 64 and this Harvard and a 56 Deluxe tweed. And there's something else too, and I was like, wow, where are those? And he goes, well, they're upstairs. I didn't want to sell them, but he said, now I'm starting to think, because I don't use them anymore, wondering if. So, we agreed on a price for the Blackface Deluxe, and I got it and loved it. And he said, I'm going to bring along this Tweed Deluxe. Just keep it and mess with it for a while and see if it's something you might be interested in. And I have another Tweed, I can't remember if it's called a Vibrolux or a Tremolux. It's one of those, but it's been recovered with some other kind of wild tweed looking stuff. And I just fell in love with that Deluxe. And then he said, hey, I was going to keep the Harvard, but here's this too. Why don't you mess with this? And I'm like, well. And you love amps. I love amps. I mean, I've got, I think last count I had maybe 35 heads and probably 20 combos. And it's just a problem.
It is a problem. Those are really cool amps. Those are kind of, they're somewhat rare. You don't see a ton of them because they were kind of in a weird spot in the lineup, because it kind of went champ, in the Tweed era, in the narrow panel like this is, they went from the champ to the Princeton, which at that point was just a champ with a bigger speaker in it. It was basically still single-ended, a single power tube. But the Harvard was the smallest amp that had 2 power tubes on it. And then it jumped up to the Vibrolux, which is an identical amp, but with tremolo on it. And then above that was the Deluxe, which had more power, but it didn't have tremolo. And then the Tremolux was the Deluxe with tremolo. And then you get up into the bigger amps like the Bandmaster that had 310s, the Pro that had a 15 and all those. And so it was kind of a weird amp in the lineup that a lot of guys would either get the Champ or Princeton, or they would jump up to the Deluxe, or they would get the one below it, the Vibrolux, which was that amp, but also with tremolo on there.
Right.
And so you just don't see that many of them. And but of course, it's famous as being the Steve Cropper amp. Oh, because that's what he used on a lot of the Booker T and the MG stuff was. And then I think also Ace Frehley used one a lot on Kiss stuff, where he used one cranked all the way up. And so those are kind of the famous uses of the Harvard. But it's the same amp as the Tweed Vibrolux, except it doesn't have the tremolo on there.
Okay. Well, then it's a Tremolux that I have.
Yeah, because it's bigger.
Bigger. Yeah. But I just, it was just there, and I got it, and we, he made a good deal, and so But I've been using this at home some, with my 212 Marshall cabinet or my 212 Bogner, which is in a, little bunker under my house that nobody can ever hear. So and I've used all those like that, and they're just super cool. I mean, they saturate differently and quickly and organically, I guess is the word that gets.
How much home recording do you do where people are sending you tracks?
I'm probably 50%.
Yeah.
Give or take either side, depending on the week. Overdubbing at home is fun, and I find myself, I'll take something on and I'll sit there and tweak on it until I'm down to about $5 an hour. Yeah. But at least I send stuff that I'm really happy with this. I've turned over every stone and checked it out, and the parts all work together and all that stuff. But then there's the not seeing anybody and
not getting the feedback or the
or I don't like that, whatever. But it's all of that, and the hangout with, it's just so much fun to hang out with the guys at a session. We laugh and cut up, and things happen during the tracking, while somebody will play something, it's like, wow, that sparked me to do something later it's just the music, Just
pass on either a good piece of advice that you've been given or that you wish, someone would have told you. Boy,
that could take hours, and I've messed up on every one of them, but I think that, 2 things that were told to me is always let the song dictate what needs to happen. And after you do this for a while, you know what that means. I think at first I didn't really understand that, but I'm more understanding about that now. And the other thing, very early on, that this publisher friend of mine, had actually worked at a record label, he said, you know, if you want to do sessions, you need to learn, you need to listen to every kind of music. You need to develop, you know, a knowledge of what swing music is, because you just never know. Every day, you know, one day you might be playing a Highway 40 blues type thing with a telly, and the next day it might be a Led Zeppelin type thing, you know. And you know, in our world, early sessions, you never really went that far with like dirty stuff, you know. But now, I mean, everything is wide open. Country, I think the country is coming back. You know, there's some real clean things happening now, and then there's some real dirty stuff too. So yeah, it's all there. And do you remember Tower Records on West End?
Yes.
So I used to go into Tower about once a month, and I'd come out with a stack of CDs, and I would go get some world music thing, you know, and I would go to the front and ask, what are you listening to now? And they would say, you know, I'm listening to this punk record. Okay, need one of those. And I'd get, you know, a couple of whoever was the top of the country market at that point, and whoever was the top of the rock market. And, you know, at that point you start learning, in this job, you start learning how to look at, like, how does the Edge get his sound, you know?
Yeah.
And everything is all, I mean, all the opinions are all over the place, so, but you can only do what you can do. It's like, how do I get what's perceived as that sound? If somebody calls something like, you know, we want this, can you do a guitar thing like the Edge would do? It's like, yeah. Okay, yeah, boom, now I figured it out. Not right now, but I figured it out, you know, last month. So, and then, you know, you learn some swing stuff, and you learn how they approach that, and the licks they use, how their mind works. A little, you know, how to get that tone, because I found, for me, if I can find the tone, I can kind of find the part that goes with that, which gets back to the song, you know. That's the most important part of it. So it's my advice, my 2 cents.
Well, Jeff, thank you so much for coming down and talking with us. Thank you for, you know, bringing your guitars and telling your story. It was a hoot. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zach. Enjoyed it.